to the first verse, God is talking about Ephraim, and then he ties this to Israel itself. When Ephraim spoke trembling, he exalted himself in Israel. But when he offended through Baal worship, he died. So when Ephraim spoke, being the largest tribe and the influence that they would have, when Ephraim spoke, then that would cause fear, or as some translations or thoughts would present, there would be trembling, fear in Israel, and people would follow that largest tribe. Now, we go back, earlier in the book, we noticed the fact that the charge was made like priest, so like people. Well, you have this large tribe in the nation of Israel, and so they would be dominant, and when they spoke, then it caused Israel to tremble. And yet he exalted himself in Israel, and when he offended through Baal worship, he died. So this is indicative of the entire nation. They're going to be carried away into captivity. We've talked about this on multiple occasions, but yet he is picturing this, and he is continuing to exemplify the great love that he has for his people, but at the same time he's got to identify the source. And he says in verse 2, now they sin more and more. And I'm going to suggest to you that the first part of this second verse, brethren, this is how sin works. Very seldom, and we've talked about this before, when I sin, how many sins do I commit? Anybody know? 2. Every time I sin, I commit in reality 2 sins. Because I do something that I should not have done, but at the same time, as I'm doing that which I shouldn't have done, then I'm failing to do that which I should have done. So we have 2 sins that are being committed. So every time the folks of Ephraim, every time they would go to their idolatrous place of worship, and we identified those last week. We had Gilgal as one place. And so every time they'd go to Gilgal and they would bow down and they would worship this false idol, they were committing a sin. But then there was another sin they were committing because they were failing to do what? Give honor and worship the true and living God. So they sin more and more and have made for themselves molded images, idols of their silver according to their skill. All of it is the work of craftsmen, they say of them. Now, those of you who were with us Wednesday night, Ian put a picture of the images that had been uncovered through archaeological digs and everything, going back to the days of Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and we know that Rachel stole her daddy's household idols. And so the pictures that were presented, these are things that early on would be done, and these were made out of clay, and they were images that they would carry with them, and yet there's a greater significance historically from that, as Ian brought out, because that also identified that whoever possessed this idol possessed what? The land and the property. And I would suggest that you go back sometime and you reread those chapters in Genesis where Abraham buys the cave of Machpelah, buys it from the sons of Heth. And so that land is bought, and yet there's a transaction that is described. Now, number one, Abraham paid a huge amount of money for a piece of property. But then they had to write a deed, and that deed listed boundary lines, it listed trees, it had everything that could possibly be involved in that piece of property were recorded in that deed. So then it wasn't just like we might think of today, where the surveyors come out and they drive a stake down over here and then they move over here, they mark our boundaries. This was identifying trees. It would identify everything of significance. And so when we think about these idols that they're worshiping, it is things now that they have advanced. They've moved from making them out of clay. Now what are they building them out of? And it's not just the little household idols or gods that they'd created. Now they have places of worship, and so they have very elaborate idols that they built. And most of these idols and stuff, as you go and you research it and everything, it has to do with fertility. Two things, fertility and protection. Those are the things that they were worried about. So they're searching for the needs to be met by an improper source. And he says, now when they sacrifice, let those who sacrifice kiss the calves. A practice of bowing down, to prostrate oneself, to fall toward, and to show great, as we would think of it, a very sort of archaic term, to show great obeisance or to worship. And so therefore, because they're doing this, they shall be like the morning cloud and like the early dew that passes away, like chaff blown off from a threshing floor and like smoke from a chimney. Folks, these are all identifying things that are not going to what? Last. They're just fleeting. Well, this is Israel. This is what is being portrayed in this particular thought and idea. Now, if you would go to 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings 19 and verse 18. As we continue to look at this idea of bowing down to the idols, these images. And notice this context, because it's totally different, because in this chapter we have Elijah. In 1 Kings 18, what has he just done? He's withstood the prophets of Baal. Folks, who was Baal? What was Baal? Okay, a false god. It was an idol. It was that which was brought in by the Canaanites. It was still in the land, and when the children of Israel came up out of Egypt, then they were told, drive all those people out, because God knew, we leave them in the land, what's going to happen? Their worship practices are going to be adopted by the people. Drive them out. Well, they failed to do that. Now we come to 1 Kings chapter 18, and now we see where Elijah goes out and he's facing the prophets of Baal. And all of that event of chapter 18, and Elijah proves to be very faithful and successful to God because of God's help. Now, chapter 19, he's fleeing. Things are not going the way that he thought. He's in a cave. It's been announced that they're going to try to kill him. Now in verse 18, notice as God comes and he's speaking to Elijah, now he says, yet I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. Now, this goes back to what Hosea is talking about here, about bowing toward this idol and kissing toward that idol. But now God speaking through his representative to Elijah, he says, Elijah, I've got how many that have not bowed their knee to Baal? 7,000. I've got 7,000 who haven't. And Elijah now is having, he has such a successful event in chapter 18, then chapter 19, then he's coming down off of that. And so he goes into this sort of a pity party. And I'm the only one that's left in Israel. I'm the only one that's faithful to God. And so then God says, no. As a matter of fact, Elijah, I've got 7,000 that haven't. So when we are looking at this context, and it seems to indicate that all of Israel had just turned to Baal worship. Well, we need to remember that from 1 Kings 19, because God says, no, I've got 7,000 people. So not everyone has what? Bowed their knee to Baal. Now, folks, I just want to, a modern day application of this as to how folks might interpret this, or how folks might glean and be encouraged by this is, I don't know how many years it's been going on. Back when I was in preaching school, I know it was started. But there's a PTP workshop that's held every year. They've now got it in two places, one time in Branson, Missouri, and the other time in Sevierville, Tennessee. And it started out as a preacher's training workshop, PTP. And so started out very small. I think the first 5 or 6, 7 years, maybe even up to 10 years, they would have 15 to 20 preachers that would gather. And but now, if you were to be in attendance, how many Christians do you think you'd be around? 7,000. Close to it. They're really close. I think their max number this year at Sevierville wouldn't be nearly as big in Branson, because I don't think the facility will hold them. But there was over 6,000 people, 6,000 Christians that were there this year. And so that is an event, and one of the things, because the students from the School of Preaching, they got to go this year for the first time as a student body. And so I asked them, I said, what was the most impressive thing there? And I mean, when you look at the lineup, it's the who's who of men in the brotherhood that are speaking, and things that are, I mean, it's a big event. But the thing that was most impressive to every one of them was there are people from all over the world who make the effort to come there and spend the week there. Christians from all over the world. And they said, the thing that we take away from this, and that the students that I talked to about this at any length, is we're not the only ones. Folks, so many times we get into this mentality that Elijah had. We're the only ones that are doing what God would have us to do. We're the only ones. Folks, there are Christians all over this world who are doing what God would have them to do. And we're not the only ones. All I've got to do is make sure that even if I am the only one, then I'm willing to what? Keep doing what God would have me to do. Yes, Ian? Yeah.
So it had went from that 3 or 4 inch tall, easy to carry around God, to now it being something that resembled a man.
Okay. And so if we just put a ballpark figure on dates and times, where do we put Moses? We're going to put him like at 1500. And then we're going to, and so then Moses is going to write recording the events of of the book of Genesis, and so that's going to take us back to roughly 2000. You put Abraham probably right in there around 2000 BC. Then you're going to come forward, and so then from 1500, then we come down to David, and that's 1000 BC. And so then we come down to the time frame here of Hosea, and we're looking at the mid to late 700s BC. And so as we put all this together, we can see how, as he's talking about this idea, they sin what? More and more. And so, it is true even in our own day. Sin is that which, it's whatever aspect of it you want to talk about. Something that, we help support and everything, which I think is a good work, and that's the Home of Recovery up at Winsboro. And I wish I had a $100 bill for every one of those men in the years I've been going there that have told me I never thought it would lead to this. I never thought this is where I would be. I'd have several $100 bills. But the point of it is, when they took that first hit of their drug, or even if it's alcohol, whatever the case might be, they did not realize, they didn't think, oh, this is where I'm going to end up. Well, that's the horrible nature of sin. What does sin promise? Okay, it promises pleasure, instant gratification. And you're all familiar with Jerry Hill, the black preacher and man from the Home of Recovery. Folks, he wasn't an addict. He didn't have a life of addiction. He went to his workplace, and the boss told him on one occasion there was a basement as to where he was working, and it had a boiler and everything in it, and Jerry was told, you go down there and you oversee that boiler, because they'd had a man to come in and repair it. Well, that boiler blew up. And so Jerry is burnt. I mean, he has major, major burns and scar tissue and everything all over him. And he'll sit in class, or did when he was there, and he'd have to have hand lotion or some type of lotion, and he'd have to lotion himself up because that skin would dry out and just go to, that's his life. Well, when he went into the hospital, and they did all the scrubbing, the burn and all that, well, how excruciating is that? So when he left the hospital, you know what the hospital handed him? He said, I had a plastic bag of pain medicine with these instructions, take as needed. Well, what do you think he did when he ran out? He had to find some other source to ease the pain. Well, then what did that turn into? Addiction, which wound him up in the county jail, which then from the county jail, now he's at, because of getting arrested and all of that, now he's at the Home of Recovery, and he does his time there, and so then there he obeys the gospel and everything, and so then he goes to Southwest, and so, but he, a lot of times we look at these folks and we think, well, how did they get in this shape? How did they get here? Well, Jerry has a very unique story to tell you. And all he's got to do is wear a short-sleeve shirt, and I guarantee you're going to have vivid reminders. That skin is horrible. Horrible. And he's like that all over, from here down. So, sin promises way, way more than it can ever deliver. And Israel failed to remember that they had a God on their side who could do more than they could ever imagine. So now in verse 4, he says, yet I am the Lord your God, ever since the land of Egypt, and you shall know no God but me. For there is no Savior besides me. I knew you in the wilderness, in the land of great drought. When they had pasture, they were filled, and their heart was exalted. Therefore, they what? Forgot me. This is the very same thing that they were warned about in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 10 through 12 by Moses, as they now have experienced the wilderness wanderings, and now they're on the threshold of entering into the promised land. And Moses sounds this warning. When you go into the land and you occupy what? Houses you did not build. Cities you did not build. You have vineyards you did not plant. Folks, the picture is when they entered into the promised land and they come upon a certain location and they drove those people out, then they just moved right in and took up residence. And so they're living in houses they didn't build, cities they didn't build, vineyards they didn't plant, and all of these things, and this is God's provision for them. And he says, now this is what you need to be aware of. Be careful lest you forget God. Forget me. And so now they were filled with, in this particular instance, he says, I've been your God, and we've noticed this for the last couple of weeks where this phrase is coming up. I've been your God since I led you out of Egypt, and you know me. There's no other Savior besides me in the wilderness. And, we read about that, the wilderness wanderings and God taking care of them. And, we noted how he led them by a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day. And so he would tell them where to stop and where to set up their camp and then when to break camp and when to move on. But every morning they went out, and what did they do? Picked up their food for the day. Their clothes never wore out. Their shoes never wore out in 40 years. Now, brethren, you may keep shoes and you may keep clothes for 40 years. But if you wear them daily, are they going to last that long? No. But now they're wearing these clothes every day and they never wear out. Well, this is all part of God's provision for them. And so in our way of thinking, we're like, well, how could they forget God? How could they? Well, if we were to ask them, and we've talked about this before as we've gone through, because this is not a new point that Hosea is bringing up. If we went up and asked him, said, did you forget God? No, I haven't forgotten God. Because what were they doing? They were going through some motions where they were giving allegiance to God, but then at the same time, it's like they would leave one aspect and they might be worshiping God over here in this manner, and then they'd revert right back over here and go to worshiping the idol. And if you look at verse 4, God says, and you shall know no God but me. No God but me. Now they would say, well, no, we're covering our bases. And by Baal worship, idol worship, and then turning back to Jehovah God, they were trying to serve two gods. And that's impossible, as Jesus addresses in the Sermon on the Mount. All right, Dale. Yes.
And as long as that free moral agent is not guided by something, it's going to do what it wants to do. And when we look at ourselves, and we look at a little bit of God's teaching, we don't have to have 50 years of it or whatever. But who had you rather be? He tells us, man doesn't have the ability to guide his own footsteps.
Yep.
Is the only one that's going to get it.
That is true. He's the only one.
And he's the only one that's right, he's the only one that's going to get it. And so, in looking at that, we don't give, man doesn't give God the credit he deserves for being the creator.
Yeah.
I created everything. What did he tell? What were you? What did he tell Job?
Where were you when I created
Where were you when I created
all these things? Yeah.
So if I'm gonna obey somebody, it needs to be somebody that's a little bit better off than I.
Right. And the thing about it is, the Israelites here that he's talking about, many of them probably had not totally abandoned God, but the point of the matter is they were not serving God exclusively. They were trying to do those things which Jesus says man cannot do, because you cannot serve two masters. You just can't. It's impossible. And I know in this day and time we're good multitaskers. Do you look at yourself as a multitasker? I know a lot of times we do. And a lot of times by necessity we have to multitask. But in my multitasking, if I stop and really look at it, I may be doing 2 or 3 things at the same time, but none of those 2 or 3 get the same attention. One of them demands what? More attention than the others. And so, you may be multitasking. I mean, I've walked into, offices and stuff, and people have been on their computers and they've been typing and they've had their cell phone on and they're talking on the phone at the same time and everything, and they're multitasking. But then as that goes on, then one of those things is going to demand more attention. It may be the phone call, it may be the computer, it may be whatever they're working on, whatever that case might be. But we have a difficult time multitasking. At least I do. And so I want us to think about this as we drop down now. And he says, they forgot me. Brethren, that is still a danger today. And as we are blessed, and God blesses us so greatly, we need to be careful lest we forget God. Verse 7 and 8, so I will be to them like a lion. Like a leopard by the road I will lurk. I will meet them like a bear deprived of her cubs. I will tear open their rib cage, and there I will devour them like a lion. The wild beast shall tear them. That's not a very pleasant picture. And so what we're seeing here is God is not going to allow them to just go along in this rebellious and sinful life and not punish them. Now, there's one of the things that we need to keep in mind, and I don't guess I'll ever forget this, and I've shared this with y'all before, but I think right here, as God is pronouncing judgment upon them, folks, this is a horrible picture. A lion. I don't want to meet a lion out in the wild. Folks, I like that big, thick glass between me and a lion, even at the zoo. I don't want to meet a lion. Or a leopard. I know at this point in my life, there ain't no way I'm outrunning that leopard. I might wish somebody else was there, because then what am I thinking? I just got to outrun you. Well, lion and a leopard. How about a bear? This past summer, Sue and I, we were up in Montana and that area and stuff. We saw some bear. I never thought one time, well, let me park the car and see if I can get a little closer. These are images and animals that I don't want to encounter. And not only is it a bear, but it's a bear deprived of her cubs. Angry mama. And he says, I'm going to tear open their rib cage. Now get that picture in your mind. And there I will devour them like a lion. The wild beast shall tear them. This is punishment, and it's not a pleasant picture that is presented. Now, is it literal? No. It is a picture of how judgment is going to be brought upon the nation, particularly the nation of Israel. Those 10 tribes to the north is to whom Hosea is writing, and this is coming. And as I mentioned earlier, the image that we get in the Bible of judgment. Folks, there's only one place in the Bible where God's judgment upon humanity is shown, and there is no mercy at all. Even here, with the nation of Israel, this punishment that was coming upon them as the Assyrians carried them away, this punishment coming, it's going to be tempered with what? Love and mercy. Yes, they're going to suffer for the wrong that they've done, but there's still going to be mercy, because even in this punishment, they're going to be carried away into captivity. But then after that period of captivity is over, then what's going to happen? They're going to be given the opportunity to return home. So even in this punishment, that is, this is not a pretty picture here, verses 7 and 8. But we have to see God's mercy even in our reading and understanding of it. Because like I said, there's only one place in the Bible where you read about God's judgment. And folks, there's no mercy involved in that. Anybody know where that is? No. That's with Korah and Dathan and them, as the ground opened up and swallowed them. That's horrible. But even in that instance, God didn't destroy everybody. We go to Judges 7 or Joshua 7, and we think about Achan. Well, Achan and all that were associated with him, relatives of his family, they all died. But even in that, not all of Israel died. Brethren, the picture of any time judgment's going to occur and it's going to be absent from God's mercy is in Revelation chapter 6. And in that context, toward the end of that chapter, matter of fact, the latter verses of that chapter, this is the statement. Everyone's going to stand before God in judgment, the small and the great. And the judgment, the great day of his wrath has come. And that day, the judgment is going to be so severe that men are going to holler, they're going to wish that the mountains would fall down upon them and cover them up. Because the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Horrific events have happened throughout the history of the world. Even things we read about in the Bible, things that are just horrific. But you see in every one of them God's mercy. Now God is going to be merciful to this nation that has what? Forgotten him. You're going to suffer, and you're going to suffer dearly, but you are still going to be the objects of my love and the objects of my mercy. Verse 9 through 11, O Israel, you are destroyed, but your help is from me. I will be your king. Where is any other, that he may save you in all your cities? And your judges, to whom you said, give me a king and princes. I gave you a king in my anger, and I took him away in my wrath. Now, folks, what is this taking us all the way back to here? I gave you a king in my anger, and I'm taking him away in my wrath. You know, we oftentimes will read 1 Samuel 8, where the people are asking for a king, asking for a king, asking for a king. And God tells Samuel to do what? Do it. Do it. Samuel, they've not rejected you. They've done what? They've rejected me. And we read that, and we don't think that there is that had any effect upon God whatsoever. God's people have said, we don't want you to be our king any longer. We want a king like what? The nations around us. And what do I read here from Hosea chapter 13, verse 11? As my late friend, Brother Don Walker, used to say, if you write in your Bible, you might want to underline that. I gave you a king in my anger. God was not happy with Israel when they made that decision. But what does Dale mentioned earlier? What did he make even Israel? Free moral agents. You choose. You decide. Now, you're not going to be immune from the consequences of your choice. But we get a clear picture as to how God looked at this. I gave you a king in my anger. Folks, has God ever been angry with you? Thank God we did not suffer his what? Unmitigated wrath. Every time God has ever brought judgment on the world, and the judgment that may continue to fall on various nations and things, it is tempered, it is meted out with his mercy and his love. All of those things, those characteristics that we so appreciate of God, all of those things are still in play. But as I mentioned earlier, there's coming a point in time when he will not. He's going to judge the world, and there's not going to be a time of mercy any longer. Not going to be a time of patience and long-suffering. No, God's going to mete out judgment one day, and what's going to happen? This world is going to be divided between the righteous and the unrighteous. It's not the rich and the poor. It's not the smart and the unsmart, or the non-smart, or the stupid, or however you want to describe that, the ignorant. No, it's going to be divided between the righteous and the unrighteous. And the righteous are going to go and spend eternity with God forever. Where are the unrighteous going? Ultimately. Now, folks, I'm convinced that 1 second after death, we know exactly where we're spending eternity. Because the soul leaves my body and it goes to the Hadean world, and I'm either going to one or two places. I'm going to torment, or I'm going to go to Abraham's bosom. And if I'm in Abraham's bosom, then what am I going to enjoy? Peace and tranquility. I'm going to be in the happiest place I've ever been in my life. But if I wind up in torment, what's it going to be? I wish Jesus would allow that rich man to be resurrected one time and let him come back and speak to the world. That rich man, every single day, accommodatively, is awakening, and he's asking what? Somebody please come and put some water on my tongue, because I am in torments in this flame. Yeah. Well, Jesus Jesus says they have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And so when we think about this, as God is addressing this to his nation, God is not going to give them up easily. But we know from history that he's going to. And when he does, it's going to be because they wanted a king. And he granted them a king. And he says, I gave him to you in my anger, but I'm taking him away in my wrath. And so, we'll pick up next week in verse 12. And what do you think the odds would be we finish the book next week? Fire, you got to be more positive than that, gal. You can't be that negative all the time.